When I was younger, I went to Blockbuster a lot. My parents gave me free reign to rent basically whatever I wanted, so naturally, most of the time, what I picked was complete dog shit. But on occasion, I'd stumble on a gem. One of those gems was the 2003 action comedy starring Chow Yun-fat and Seann William Scott, Bulletproof Monk. Like most prepubescent boys of the early 2000s, I was completely obsessed with the American Pie series. So when I found out that Stifler was going to be in a kung fu movie, I was all in. I remember loving this movie when I first saw it, but in the years since, I've never really heard anyone talk about it. Seann William Scott and Chow Yun-fat's careers took a major nosedive after this movie came out, and it seemed like one of those movies that was just destined to be forgotten. But the movie lingered in my mind, so I decided to dig it up and give it a watch, see how it holds up 18 years later. Before we get into the movie itself, I think it's worth exploring how this movie came about. The movie is based on a comic book series by the same name, published by Image Comics in 1998. The miniseries is written by Brett Lewis, Gotham Chopra, and R.A. Jones. It's about a young boy of Tibetan descent living in America named Kar. Kar's ancestors were saved from evil Nazi scientists by a Mongolian cowboy warrior with extraordinary powers, the Bulletproof Monk. According to legend, this hero disappeared once the villagers were safe, but he left behind an amulet now possessed by Kar's family. Now grown, Kar lives in San Francisco's Chinatown and works for the local gang with ties to China. When the leader of the gang is killed, Kar is forced to find the Bulletproof Monk. MGM picked up the rights to the movie and started production in the summer of 2002. Comic book movies were booming at this time. The first Singer X-Men movie had come out, and Spider-Man 1 had demolished the box office in May. So the hopes for this movie were pretty high. It had a budget of $52 million, which was kind of middling for the time. The script was written by Ethan Reff and Cyrus Voris, neither of which had written anything particularly substantial up to that point. But they would go on to write the story for Kung Fu Panda, which shares some similarities to Bulletproof Monk. Paul Hunter was pegged to direct. He was a prolific music video director who had worked with Eminem, Will Smith, Mariah Carey, Britney Spears. This was his only movie directing credit. So this movie had some unproven talent at the writing and directing spots. But a bright point was John Woo was producing this movie. The famous Hong Kong director was red hot at the time. John Woo is obviously best known for a string of legendary Hong Kong action movies in the late 80s and early 90s, many of which starred Chow Yun-fat. It's not hyperbole to call Chow Yun-fat one of the most recognizable Hong Kong actors of all time. His collaborations with Woo in films like A Better Tomorrow, Hard Boiled, and The Killer inspired literally hundreds of Hollywood ripoffs in the 1990s. It seemed like everyone was trying to capture the magic that those movies had, including John Woo himself, who transitioned into Hollywood movies in the 1990s, directing Face Off, Broken Arrow, and the second Mission Impossible movies, none of which reached the heights of his previous works. Chow Yun-fat tried to break into Hollywood with the 1998 movie The Replacement Killers, trying to reuse a lot of the same elements from his character in The Killer. It was a financial bomb. But just 2 years later, he starred in the Ang Lee directed Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. The movie was a cultural phenomenon, a smash hit at the box office and the Oscars. It made all the sense in the world to put Chow Yun-fat in a big Hollywood movie. And Bulletproof Monk seemed like the movie that could be his big breakout in America. It had plenty of action, it used the same wire work techniques that were so iconic from Crouching Tiger, and most importantly, just like in the John Woo movies, Chow Yun-fat works best when he's paired with a partner or a sidekick, a brother in arms. And that's where Seann William Scott comes in. After bursting onto the scene as Stifler in American Pie in 1999, Seann William Scott went on a 4-year tear that put him near the top of the comedy world. Following American Pie, he had bit roles in Final Destination and Road Trip, both of which were box office successes. And then he teamed up with Ashton Kutcher in the stoner comedy Dude, Where's My Car?, which was also unexpectedly a massive hit at the box office. Then he reprised his role as Stifler in American Pie 2, which was an even bigger smash hit than the first. He also managed to squeeze in a very memorable cameo in Old School. Scott was on a hot streak at the box office, but he was quickly being typecast as the idiot asshole best friend character. He played this archetype extremely well, but by 2002, there was clearly an attempt to push him into more of a classic action hero role. The Rundown, Southland Tales, The Dukes of Hazzard were all attempts to make Scott a leading man in an action movie, but none of those were particularly well received or successful at the box office. Bulletproof Monk, I think, was the movie with the best potential to break Scott out of the Stifler stereotype. The movie starts in Tibet, 1943, with Chow Yun-fat fighting his master on a rope bridge in the mountains. The scene is actually pretty well choreographed. It gives you a lot of those Crouching Tiger vibes, but the CGI has not aged well. These opening scenes look rough. This is where we learn about the 3 prophecies that need to be fulfilled in order to become the guardian of this mystical scroll. These are going to be pretty important for the rest of the movie. The scroll has the ability to destroy the world or bring it into paradise. Guardian's role is to protect the scroll for 60 years. I don't know why they chose 60 years. It seems completely arbitrary, but we'll go with it. For those 60 years, the Guardian is gifted with superhuman abilities. This is when the Nazis show up, led by this guy. Kind of looks like a mix between Stellan Skarsgård and Guy Pearce. He is absolutely chewing the scenery apart in every single scene he's in.
Monk! Monk!
Then we're brought 60 years in the future. And hey look, it's clearly Toronto, but let's just pretend that it's New York. This is where we're introduced to Seann William Scott's character, Carr, a low-level pickpocket accompanied by the very best early 2000s rap rock.
Rush hour.
The monk is being pursued by some guys in suits hired by the descendants of the Nazi we saw in the first scene, and Carr is being chased by the police. Both of them, however, stop and help this little girl who's fallen into the tracks of the subway. Here, for some reason, instead of putting his backpack full of loot on his back like a backpack is meant to be worn, Carr instead throws it away to help pull this girl's leg free as the monk bends the steel bar with his mind. This seems like a really useful skill that he never uses for the rest of the movie. After this little encounter, we get our first scene between Seann William Scott and Chow Yun-fat, and this is probably one of the better parts of the movie. The chemistry between these two is really good. You have Chow Yun-fat, who plays the eternal optimist. He is the ultimate morally righteous character, but Yun-fat gives him a little bit more dimension, adds some mischievousness to him, some playfulness from time to time, and Chow Yun-fat just has this likability, this cool factor to him. If you've seen his earlier movies with John Woo, that's the part that really shines through. That's what makes him such a great action hero, is he's a badass, but he's also funny and he's also smooth, and he just does it all really effortlessly. Seann William Scott is playing the role of the skeptic. He doesn't believe in all this mystical bullshit that the monk is spouting off. It's a pretty classic old wise Zen mentor paired with a disobedient student relationship, but it works really well. Carr swipes the scroll and is ultimately taken to the underground lair of Mr. Funk. This guy is a major ham and isn't really threatening at all, but he's committing 100% to this bit, and I can respect that. This is where we also meet Bad Girl Jade, played by Jamie King. The filmmakers are definitely trying to imbue her with some Trinity vibe. Some of her moves are very Matrix-esque. This is where we get our first big fight sequence. It's filmed very well. The director Hunter is a music video director, so it makes sense that his choreography and his framing are all really solid. And Seann William Scott is pretty adequate in this fight. He's getting doubled in a lot of these sequences, but he's doing some of these moves, and in the behind the scenes features, you can see that he actually took this role pretty seriously, doing a fair bit of training, and it looks like he's really committed to this role. Carr's holding his own for a little bit, but eventually he gets too cocky with his pipe and he flames out. Jade, Jamie King's character, has to save his ass in the fight. After the scene in the subway, Carr heads back to his apartment at the Golden Palace movie theater. Here we find out that Carr works for Mr. Kojima. The character is a pretty broad stereotype, but they kind of poke fun at the fact that he's offensive stereotype, and honestly, that's the best you can ask for in 2003. Kojima is the one person in Carr's life that actually believes in him and sees his potential, so you know he's dying at some point. That's just Hero's Journey 101 shit. The monk and Carr get a little bit more one-on-one bro bonding time, as Carr explains that he chose his name because it means family in Cantonese. The monk corrects him on the pronunciation. This is the equivalent of those people who get random Chinese characters tattooed. They think it means enlightenment, but it actually means chicken noodle soup. The name explanation is pretty stupid and a little bit cringy, but we have to make Carr fit into those pesky prophecy rules, so what are you gonna do? Then the monk lays down some mystic riddle of enlightenment.
Why do hot dogs come in packages of 10 while hot dog buns come in packages of just 8?
Now, as an 8-year-old, I racked my brain for a long time on this one, and I have still not come up with a good answer. The movie gives us one at the end, something about how life doesn't always go the way you plan, so be happy with what you got, because you can always get a hot dog. Well, no, that's not true. What if you run out of hot dogs? What the hell are you gonna do then? We then get introduced to Nina, the granddaughter of the Nazi we saw shoot up the Tibetan monastery at the start of the film. She's now the organizer of a museum exhibit on human rights atrocities, and we get this weird back and forth between her and Jade. And I think this is a good time to talk about Jamie King's performance. She is wooden as a board through most of this movie. She's supposed to be a kind of cold character, but it feels like she's about to pass out at any moment. Not to mention the fact that her and Carr have no chemistry whatsoever. She does pretty well in all the action sequences, aside from one awkward scene we'll talk about later where her and Carr are just kind of rolling around on the floor. It's supposed to be sexy, but it's just awkward looking. After the exhibit scene, she catches up to Carr and asks him about her lost necklace. Obviously, Carr swiped it during their fight earlier on, and the line readings in this scene are just atrocious. It's made worse by the fact that the Jade character is supposed to be talking in Chinese. Now, admittedly, I don't speak Chinese, but even I can tell that her accent is absolutely terrible. Another chase through the street follows, and we get a nice callback to Chow Yun-fat's connection to the John Woo universe. The monk jumps up on a taxi and dual-wield Desert Eagles, John Woo trademark, of course without the killing and blood splatter. After that, the two duck into a basement of a Chinese restaurant where a group of Tibetan monks are hiding out. Carr has this dick measuring contest in the form of a handshake grip battle with the guy the other monks have picked to be their chosen one. This guy ends up betraying the monks later on. He's a major asshole. After a bit of training, the suited Nazi guys come back and now they have a helicopter. This is a very entertaining action sequence. Everything is clearly shot, and for the most part, they're doing all this stuff using practical effects. It's the kind of sequence that's missing in modern mid-level action movies. Carr loses the scroll, and Strucker, oh yeah, Strucker's back, and now he's old as dirt. He actually turns out to be Nina's grandfather. He gets a hold of the scroll, but it actually ends up being a recipe for noodle soup. Remember how I said the writers also came up with the story for Kung Fu Panda? Well, now we're starting to see the resemblances. Carr and Poe are basically on the same journey, two unlikely heroes that get picked as the chosen one who will fulfill an ancient prophecy. A scroll that is supposed to have the ancient prophecy written on it, but it actually doesn't. It really seems like this movie was just a first draft of Kung Fu Panda. Nina finds out where Carr lives because of the movie reels that he threw at her men earlier in the movie. This is a nice little bit of screenwriting. I really like when there's callbacks to something seemingly insignificant earlier on in the movie. I think it's a really nice touch. Now, unfortunately, that means that Kojima is dead. Wow, big shocker. The monk leaves Carr so that he's no longer in harm's way, but Carr catches up to the monk at the basement of the Tibetan temple. But Nina and her goons find them. It turns out that this asshole from before sold out his brothers because he wanted a piece of the scroll power. Carr and the monk get away, but Strucker gets his hands on the other monks and has somehow developed a way to read people's minds through water. I'm gonna be honest, this part of the movie is really the only part where it kind of seems like the movie's lost focus a little bit. They really need some way to transition from the end of the second act into the beginning of the third act, and it's a little messy. I think it could be cleaned up a little bit. If you're gonna take a bathroom break, this is probably where you want to do it. So Carr and Monk are on the run and they break into Jade's house to get her help laying low. And after that awkward rolling fight that I mentioned earlier, it's a really bad fight. What is this move with the legs, with her legs holding his legs? After that little fight, Carr finds out Jade is actually the daughter of a Russian mob boss serving 20 years in federal prison. And apparently the streets are the only place where she can earn respect. I do not like Jade's character. Maybe if she was played by a better actress, it would have been a half decent role. Then Nina and her goons crash into Jade's house and she captures the monk. Somehow he can dodge bullets, but he can't dodge a tranquilizer dart. And then she has him locked up. They figure out that the monk actually tattooed the scroll onto his body, which is actually pretty clever. And then we get a truly bizarre scene where Nina's apparently horny for the monk. She's coming on to him and like grabbing on his dick. This comes out of absolutely nowhere. It throws me off every time I watch the movie. Now, the monk has the majority of the prophecy tattooed onto his body, except for the last verse. But apparently saying most of the prophecy out loud still gives you some superhuman powers, because the old decrepit Strucker all of a sudden is reverted back to Goodwill Hunting era Stellan Skarsgård. Carr and Jade storm in to save the day. Jade has her one-on-one battle with Nina. The fight is actually not too bad. It feels very similar to one of those fight sequences in the Charlie's Angels movies that came out around the same time.
King Kong.
There are way too many cuts in this sequence, but overall it's not bad. Strucker and Monk have a drag-out brawl on top of the exhibit building. It's a great fight. It's fun to see a Nazi in full regalia doing kung fu against a monk. It's just a cool visual. Strucker looks like he's about to win. Carr finally unlocks his inner enlightenment and finds out how to defy the laws of gravity, gets the upper hand on Strucker, and he falls off the roof. After freeing the monks that Strucker captured, Carr has now fulfilled the prophecy to become the next Guardian. The ritual starts, but wait, Strucker is back, and he shoots Jade, but since Carr and Jade both fulfilled the prophecy, she got half of the prophecy on her body, so she's now immortal. It's a little cheap fake out, but I don't mind it. So, is Bulletproof Monk good? Yeah. It's actually a pretty good movie. The action is solid all the way around. The acting is fine, not great, but not atrocious, maybe with a few exceptions in the Jade scenes. But this movie bombed at the box office, making just under $40 million. I have rarely heard it talked about at all. Maybe the reason for its failure was that it didn't actually live up to the marketing. In a lot of the trailers, it made it seem like this was going to be a mix between Crouching Tiger and John Woo action movies with a bit of Matrix sprinkled in, but it's actually more of a traditional buddy action comedy. It works, but it never really reaches the level of those other movies that it's trying to evoke. The reason I would still recommend this movie, despite all of its flaws, is because Hollywood literally doesn't make movies like this anymore. A mid-level action-adventure movie with a real script, practical effects, that kind of movie doesn't exist. The only movies that ever get made are big-budget superhero movies or disaster movies with established IP, or alternatively, low-budget indies. The middle class of movies has gotten completely squeezed out. Is Bulletproof Monk a great movie? No. Not by a long shot, but it's very watchable. It moves at a good clip, the story is engaging, and for the budget, the action is pretty good. I think this movie represents a crossroad in Hollywood filmmaking. Superhero movies like X2 and Spider-Man were released around the same time, and we were in the midst of the first superhero movie boom. Mid-level movies like Bulletproof Monk were quickly getting edged out. On top of that, the wave of films trying to copy and capitalize on the success of Hong Kong action movies of the 1990s were also dying down. It seemed like Hollywood wasn't interested in pushing a guy like Chow Yun-fat to be a major mainstream movie star anymore, which is really unfortunate because in his movies with John Woo, Yun-fat constructed some of the most iconic and interesting action heroes of all time, and I think he could have done the same in Hollywood if he was given the chance. A similar thing happened with Seann William Scott. It seemed like there was a span of 2 years where he was getting pushed to the moon. It looked like he would be the next action hero star in Hollywood, but I think you can point to 2 people that stopped his momentum cold. One is Ryan Reynolds. He was occupying a very similar space to Seann William Scott, a charming yet snarky action hero. I think Reynolds played the smartass a little bit better than Scott. Scott was always better at playing the doofus character, which didn't really vibe with the leading man criteria. The second person was his co-star in The Rundown. Came out the same year as Bulletproof Monk, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Ever since he left WWE for movies, he's been on the fast track to becoming the #1 action hero in Hollywood. And I think he kind of bulldozed Scott in the process. This movie should have been a hit. It was well made, the performances were good, it looked like the studio thought it was going to be a hit. They even went so far as making a tie-in video game for the PS2 and Xbox. The trailer is on YouTube. I suggest looking into it. It actually looks pretty cool. Unfortunately, the company making the game shut down, and after the lackluster performance of the movie, the project was scrapped altogether. Bulletproof Monk is a forgotten gem from a bygone era. If you need something fun to watch that doesn't melt your brain with special effect after special effect, pop it in, give it a watch. So those were my ramblings about the movie Bulletproof Monk. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think of the movie in the comments below. And while you're there, also let me know why you think hot dog buns come in packages of 10 when hot dogs only come in packages of 8. It's most likely because they want you coming back to buy more hot dogs. But if you come up with anything more creative, let me know. Thanks for watching. I'll try and do better next time.